The tree creaked as Nolan Carter shifted his weight, adjusting the strap of his sleeping harness. 10 feet above the mossy forest floor of Grelix IX, he yawned, blinked up at the unfamiliar constellations peeking through the canopy, and scratched at a mosquito bite that had appeared despite the repellent patch on his neck. Below, a trio of alien students stood in a loose cluster, their sleek data recorders blinking quietly in the twilight. One, a blue-skinned being with iridescent scales and 3 knees, tilted his head and said in a voice like dry leaves scraping pavement, "Why does the human sleep in trees?" Nolan blinked down at them, then yawned again, lazily. "Saves me from night creatures." The students stared up, visibly confused. "Night creatures?" asked the tallest one, a pale, moss-colored alien named Hesk who wore a silver tabard indicating he was the lead observer. "There are no large predators in this sector." The survey data confirms it. Nolan reached into his utility pouch and flicked a small, battered screen on. It lit up with a faint red glow. "Tell that to the thing that tried to drag off my boot last night. Had 6 legs, 1 eye, and screamed like a broken blender." Hesk looked at the others, who began muttering and rapidly tapping their data recorders. One of them, a squat, cube-shaped researcher named Frolin, shuffled forward. "Clarify. Did the creature cause injury?" "Nope," Nolan said, peering down and tightening the strap around his waist. "But I'm not real keen on waking up without feet attached. So I figured, hey, trees. Old Earth solution, works like a charm." "This is irrational," said Hesk, his voice rising slightly. "We provided a zero-threat assessment. It is not standard behavior for Earth species to revert to arboreal rest patterns." Nolan raised an eyebrow. "You ever camp in Oregon during bear season?" The silence that followed was as blank as the students' blinking recorders. He sighed, leaned back against the thick branch. "Look, I'm not looking to make a species-wide statement. I'm just saying, if I hear something snarling in the dark, I'd rather be up here than down there." Hesk turned, muttering something into his recorder. The others followed suit, but none of them left. Nolan watched them shuffle around the base of the tree, clearly unwilling to admit they were still curious. "Y'all gonna stand there all night, or are you gonna do something useful?" he called down. "We are observing," Frolin replied. "Please proceed with your sleep." "Right," Nolan muttered. "Because that's not creepy." He tried closing his eyes, but the soft hum of the students' recorders and the occasional rustle of leaves made it impossible. After 15 minutes, he sat up with a groan, unfastened the harness, and began climbing down. "You're abandoning the tree strategy?" Hesk asked, voice tinged with what could have been relief. "Nope," Nolan said, dropping the last few feet to the ground. "I'm making a fire. If I'm gonna be watched like a lab rat, might as well have coffee." He set to work gathering twigs and dry leaves. The aliens watched in fascination as he struck a spark with a magnesium rod, the flame catching quickly. The warmth was immediate, and Nolan let out a satisfied grunt. Frolin crept closer, eyes wide. "Is this combustion?" "Sure is," Nolan said, pulling out a battered metal pot from his pack. "One of humanity's oldest tricks. Fire, caffeine, and inappropriate sarcasm. We've conquered continents with less." He poured water from his canister, set the pot on a flat stone beside the fire, and waited. The students gathered in a semicircle, mesmerized by the act. "We have thermal regulators," Hesk said. "Why do this manually?" "Thermal regulators don't make coffee," Nolan replied. "What is coffee?" He snorted. "Something that keeps me from punching people who ask too many questions." The students fell silent, unsure if he was serious. Nolan let it sit, enjoying the moment. When the pot started to boil, he dropped in a sachet from his pack, stirred, and waited. The smell drifted out slowly, earthy, bitter, comforting. Even the aliens seemed momentarily subdued by it. Once it was ready, Nolan poured a cup for himself and took a sip. "Now I can think straight." The fire crackled. The students didn't move. "You expecting me to share?" he asked. "Yes," Hesk said. Nolan laughed. "You wouldn't survive it. It'd burn a hole in your stomach lining." Frolin leaned forward. "Fascinating." The night passed without incident, though Nolan occasionally glanced toward the tree. As the first hints of dawn broke through the canopy, he stood, stretched, and tossed the remainder of the coffee into the ashes. "All right, I'll humor you. You want to know why I sleep in trees? Come with me." He packed up his gear and began walking. The students followed, murmuring to themselves and occasionally asking questions about pine needles, footprints, or the reflective tag on his backpack. After 20 minutes, they reached a thicket. Nolan crouched low, motioning for silence. There, he whispered. In the clearing, a carcass lay half consumed. Chunks of flesh were missing, and deep gouges marked the surrounding trees. A trail of slime led back into the brush. Hesk stepped forward, recorder raised. This was not in the survey data. Nolan nodded. Yeah, well, data doesn't always walk up and bite you in the ankle. Frolin looked pale, paler. You encountered this last night? No, Nolan said. I heard it dragging something. That's why I climbed. The students stood in stunned silence. Nolan turned to them. Still think I'm being irrational? Hess didn't respond. Back at the research site, word spread. A new predator, undocumented and aggressive, was loose in the sector. The science director, a stern six-limbed creature named Veltrax, summoned Nolan to the central observatory. You are not authorized to alter behavior protocols without clearance, Veltrax said. I didn't alter anything, Nolan replied. I adapted. There's a difference. Veltrax's gill-like breathing flaps fluttered. Your presence here is contingent on cooperative research, not improvisation. Then stop sending students to spy on me at night, and maybe I'll sleep like a normal person. Veltrax paused. We did not authorize the observation team last night. Nolan blinked. Wait, what? They were on rest cycle. Your report said you saw 3 students. Yeah, Nolan said. Hesk, Frolin, and the tall one, green-skinned Veltrax leaned forward. Hesk is not green. He is blue. Nolan's heart dropped into his boots. Veltrax activated a panel, and a live comm link opened. Hesk, confirm your location last night. The voice crackled through. I was in the dormitory. Slept through the night. Nolan stepped back. Then who the hell was I talking to? Veltrax stared for a moment, then hit an alarm. The base went into lockdown within minutes. Marines in exosuits swept the forest perimeter. Nolan found himself pulled into a debrief room, covered in sweat, still tasting the coffee from earlier. 2 hours later, they found Frolin's body. The real one. He'd been dead for at least 12 hours. Nolan sat on the cot in the medical bay, his leg bandaged from a scrape he hadn't noticed until now. Dr. Varel, the station's human xeno liaison, entered with a tablet. You were talking to mimics, she said. The hell is a mimic? Predator species. High-level infiltration capability. They don't just look like you. They study, learn, replicate behavior. They're not on the approved species list for this sector. Nolan rubbed his face. So I camped with 3 of them, and one made me coffee? Varel gave him a hard look. You made them coffee. They watched. He exhaled. Well, that's just disturbing. The rest of the week passed under heavy security. Nolan wasn't allowed back into the forest, but he watched from the observatory as teams swept the area. The trees around his old campsite were charred standard procedure to flush out hiding threats. He stood beside Hesk, the real one this time, who looked shaken. You were right, Hesk said. About the tree. Nolan nodded. Told you. Saves me from night creatures. Hesk turned slowly. We would like to study your survival protocols more closely. Nolan turned to him. You want me to teach a class? The alien nodded. Nolan hesitated, then grinned. Only if I get hazard pay. You will be provided with a reinforced tree platform. Deal. And just like that, he was a professor, teaching survival to aliens who had never needed to survive before. His first lesson was simple: never trust what you see at night. Second lesson: coffee solves almost nothing, but it makes you feel like it might. And the third one: in doubt, climb. Always climb. The lecture tent smelled faintly of burnt nylon and disinfectant. Nolan blinked against the harsh ceiling lights, wondering if alien architecture ever considered ambient lighting. He rubbed his temple and leaned against the edge of the table up front, one boot braced on the rung of a folding stool that didn't look rated for his weight. Across from him, 25 alien students sat in rows of staggered perches, stools, and floating cushions. A few adjusted their ocular lenses. 1 or 2 were digesting something noisily. The rest stared at him with expectant expressions that, to Nolan, resembled a mix of religious awe and complete suspicion. All right, he said, tapping the table with his knuckles. I'm told you signed up for this because you want to understand human field strategies. That's a generous way to phrase it. A student with a carapace like cracked porcelain flicked one of her mandibles. We were advised that your behavior presented an anomaly worth studying. Not all anomalies are inherently beneficial. Nolan gave a dry chuckle. Good to know I'm still a cautionary tale. He pulled a thermos from his pack and poured out something thick and beige into a metal cup. A few students recoiled. This is oatmeal. It's not a weapon. A squat, A translucent creature with a ring of eye stalks blinked in rapid succession. We did not assume it was. But its viscosity suggests it could be used as an adhesive, only if you let it sit for a few hours. Then, yeah, maybe you could patch a canoe with it. An elongated student with mineral-like skin raised a limb that resembled a stalactite. Why do humans consume food that transforms when exposed to time? Honestly, laziness and desperation. Some of our best recipes were invented during sieges. The tent was silent except for the faint hum of the temperature regulator. Nolan took a bite, chewed slowly, and washed it down with lukewarm tea. He pointed to a chart on the screen behind him. Let's start with something simple. You're trying to survive an unknown environment. You've got limited supplies, spotty comms, and something out there's watching you. How do you prepare? A tall, feathered student leaned forward. Deploy perimeter drones. Activate terrain mapping. Establish a defensive grid. Great, Nolan said. Now imagine your drones are fried because of a solar flare, your terrain maps upside down, and the only thing your defensive grid manages to trap is a skunk analog that sprays you so hard you can taste colors. The feathered student paused. Then, you perish. No, Nolan said, then you improvise. He walked around the table, gesturing with the oatmeal cup as if it were a lecture pointer. This is the part that seems to confuse you all. Humans don't survive because we're stronger. We survive because we're stubborn and weird, and we don't wait for the manual to arrive. A soft ripple of confusion passed through the class. I once patched a hole in a pressure suit with frozen chewing gum, he continued. Didn't last more than 15 minutes, but that was 15 minutes more than I needed. A student with bioluminescent glands blinked rhythmically. You deliberately used sugar resin as a structural sealant? Didn't have a choice. CO2 scrubber was shot, and I wasn't about to suffocate just because the mission planner forgot to pack spares. There was a pause. Then the student asked, "Did you survive?" Nolan stared at him. "What do you think?" A ripple of acknowledgement moved across the room. One student, seemingly paper-thin and hovering several inches above his cushion, tilted sideways. "Why not request evacuation?" "Because we were 6 days from the nearest retrieval point, and my only line to command was a cracked comm unit that only transmitted if I stood on one leg and held it against a static panel. That seems inefficient." "You're not wrong." Nolan took another bite. "But you learn to work with what you've got, which, most of the time, isn't much." The feathered student raised a limb again. "Your methods suggest a reliance on discomfort. Do humans prefer suffering as a condition for success?" "No," Nolan said. "We don't prefer it. We just expect it. If things go smoothly, we assume something's about to explode." The porcelain carapaced student tapped her mandible again. "Then your species is predisposed to anxiety. That's the polite way to put it." A faint chime sounded through the tent. The class session drew to a close. The students slowly began packing their recording devices and slipping off their perches. As they filtered out, a smaller group lingered near the front. One of them, a pale green student with small rotating mouth parts, waited until the others left. "We reviewed the mimic recordings," he said. "There's a discrepancy." Nolan set his cup down. "What kind of discrepancy?" "The impersonators replicated our voices with high accuracy, but your responses didn't match known human emotional patterns. You displayed no elevated cortisol levels, no defensive posturing. You treated them as ordinary." "I didn't know they weren't," Nolan said. "No," the student said. "That's the anomaly. You treated them like people, even without confirmation. That's not standard." Nolan shrugged. "I treat everyone like people until they stop acting like one. Keeps things simple." The student blinked slowly. "But it's dangerous." "Sure. But so's walking through the woods with a flashlight and a half-charged pistol. Sometimes you gamble." The student was quiet for a long moment, then said, "You're not teaching us how to survive, are you? You're teaching us how to think like you." "Not intentionally. But if it helps you make it through a rough night, I'll take the win." The student nodded once and left. Later that afternoon, Nolan sat in the base's infirmary again, arms stretched out while a medic inserted a new nutrient line. His blood sugar had dropped below normal after skipping meals the day before. He winced slightly as the cannula slid into place. "You should eat more than oatmeal," the medic said, adjusting the monitor. "Trying to save room for dinner. Dinner isn't for another 7 hours. Then I'm very prepared." She rolled her eyes and taped the line down. A quiet knock came from the doorframe. It was Varel, holding a small case. "You've been cleared for limited movement beyond the compound," she said. "Only in daylight. Escort required." Nolan looked at the nurse. See? I'm practically a celebrity. Varel set the case on the bench. Also, your teaching stipend has been recalculated. You'll be receiving additional hazard pay. Didn't realize that was an option. It wasn't. Until it was. She turned to leave, then paused. You should be aware the mimics have not been located. We believe they've left the area, but there's no confirmation. Nolan nodded. What's the plan if they haven't? We're studying their behavioral models. They adapt quickly, but they don't improvise. That's your mistake, he said. They already did. Varel gave him a look that wasn't quite agreement and wasn't quite denial. That evening, Nolan sat alone on the observation deck, legs dangling over the edge, watching the treetops sway. The forest looked peaceful. It wasn't. A student approached quietly from behind. Nolan didn't turn. You're not supposed to be out here, the student said. Neither are you, Nolan replied. The student sat beside him. I analyzed your speech patterns. You changed tone to deflect. Is that intentional? That depends. Are you trying to interrogate me or join me? The student folded his limbs. Neither. I'm trying to understand. Then you'll need more than a recorder. They sat in silence, the wind moving through the leaves below. After a while, the student said, What's the one thing you always carry? Nolan reached into his jacket and pulled out a dented metal case. He opened it, revealing a single photograph. A woman stood holding a fishing rod, grinning, water up to her knees. Why this? She taught me how to build a fire in the rain. I didn't believe her, so she made me do it. Took me 4 hours and 2 ruin lighters. And that was useful? I was 16. I didn't know it would be. But years later, on a planet where the rain never stopped, it was. The student watched the photo for a long time. Then he said, We don't keep objects like that. Too inefficient. Nolan closed the case. Then you're missing something. They sat together until the sun dipped low. Neither spoke again. And somewhere beyond the compound, in the thickening dark, something watched. Something that had learned to mimic voices, movements, even small talk. But it hadn't learned to climb. Not yet. Nolan sat on the examination table, bare from the waist up, his shirt folded neatly beside a tray of instruments. The medbay lights were warmer than usual. Someone had finally listened to his complaints about the stark overhead glare. A small alien technician, her limbs jointed like braided reeds, hovered near an ultrasonic scanner, adjusting its settings with a delicacy that suggested either great care or fear of touching a human too hard. Still tingling in the fingers, she asked, her voice like wine through tall grass. Left hand's fine now, Nolan said, flexing his fingers. Right one's still a little numb. Got that buzzing sensation, like I slept on it wrong for a week. She clicked her tongue in a pattern he couldn't interpret. Residual nerve compression. Likely from your fall last cycle. We'll check for swelling along the radial sheath. You guys don't believe in chairs with backs, do you? We do, she replied, scanning his arm. But they are optimized for beings without spinal convergence. Your skeleton is an anomaly. Story of my life. A soft knock at the medbay door interrupted them. Hesk entered, carrying a narrow case and a stack of translucent sheets. His gait was more deliberate than usual, the kind of movement that screamed unease disguised as purpose. You're early, Nolan said. Or late. I can't keep track with the way your clocks reset every 22 hours. I needed to clarify something, Hesk said, pausing just short of the table. Your sleep data from last night, there was a dip in oxygen saturation. 4% below baseline for 16 minutes. Didn't feel it, Nolan said. Probably the new thermal wrap. Cuts off circulation if I roll too far left. You were also speaking. Talking in my sleep? No. Speaking. Conversational cadence. Pauses. Responsive language. Nolan looked at the technician. She nodded, confirming. I didn't have anyone to talk to. That's what's concerning. He rubbed his face. Okay, so either I'm going nuts, or something's mimicking me again. There's no sign of them, Hesk said, placing one of the sheets on a backlit panel. But we found this in your assigned quadrant. It was a still image, grainy, but clear enough. A figure crouched near Nolan's fire pit, holding something. It was Nolan's backup thermos. I didn't leave that behind, Nolan said. I clipped it back onto my belt. We checked the logs. Your thermos is still in your pack. This is a different one. So they're replicating gear now. Clearly. The technician finished scanning. Circulation is stable. No sign of internal damage. You're cleared for release. Nolan hopped down from the table, winced, and rotated his shoulder. I'll take it easy. No tree climbing today. Hesk followed him into the corridor. The base was quieter than usual. Students were confined to the core compound until further notice. Nolan could feel the tension in the walls, like the whole place was holding its breath. "Are we sure they're gone?" he asked. "No," Hesk said. "But we found no new signs of them in 3 standard days. And no additional impersonations. Maybe they got bored. Or they accomplished what they came for." They reached the observation deck. Nolan leaned on the railing, watching the wind move through the canopy. Hesk stood beside him, arms folded. "I've been trying to figure it out," Hesk said. "Why you were targeted first?" "Because I'm alone half the time. Easy pickings." "No, that's too simplistic. They approached you. Not stealthily. They engaged you in dialogue, observed your rituals, mimicked your behavior. But they never harmed you. Unless you count giving me a heart attack when I found out Frolin was already dead. Even then, they didn't attack. They chose proximity. That implies objective-driven behavior." Nolan turned to him. "You think I was a test subject?" "I think you were a rehearsal." He let that hang in the air. Nolan didn't respond right away. He let the wind do the talking for a while. "I've been thinking too," Nolan said. "About that night. There was something off about the way they listened. Like they didn't understand the words, just the rhythm. Like they were learning how to feel human before trying to sound human. Which suggests they're more interested in identity than infiltration. Maybe they're looking for a way in that doesn't involve force. Or they've realized that understanding you is the real invasion." That got a quiet laugh out of Nolan. Not amused, just tired. "I brought something," Hesk said, opening the narrow case. Inside was a folded structure, thin, metallic, and oddly shaped. He pressed a panel, and it unfurled into a compact frame. "What am I looking at?" "A nesting module. Inspired by your tree harness. It attaches to high branches and deploys a shielded hammock with thermal lining. Lightweight, collapsible, resistant to minor fauna interference." "You made me a space hammock?" "You made it first. We just refined it." Nolan took a step closer, running a hand along the frame. "It's got cup holders?" "2. He grinned. "You're learning." Later that evening, Nolan tested it. Hesk helped him mount it between 2 thick branches, 30 feet above the ground. The module locked into place with a satisfying click, and the hammock deployed like a blooming flower. He lay back, watching the sky turn from gold to amber to deep, ink blue. The audio monitor on the side of the hammock pinged once white noise only. Nothing moving in the underbrush. No false voices. Just wind and the occasional crack of settling bark. He stayed awake longer than usual, eyes scanning the horizon. He wasn't afraid, exactly. Just aware. The way you are when nothing's wrong, but too much has happened for that to feel normal. By the time the first stars appeared, he decided. Morning came with the smell of dry leaves and a faint hint of ozone. Nolan climbed down carefully, packed the module, and walked back to the compound. In the central lab, students were reviewing data from the past week. Hesk stood at the center console, addressing the group. "There is no evidence that a threat remains," he said. "But there is evidence that we were tested. That our procedures, our assumptions were cataloged and weighed." Nolan entered quietly and took a seat in the back. "We are not here to panic," Hesk continued. "We are here to understand. And for that, we must change how we learn." He nodded to Nolan. Nolan stood, slowly. "I've been asked to give a final session," he said, "but I don't have much left to teach. You've seen what we do when things fall apart. You've seen how we adapt, how we fumble through. That's not a method. It's a mindset." He looked around the room. "You want to understand humans? Stop trying to map our logic. It's not consistent. We don't always follow rules. We follow instincts. We get things wrong. But we keep going. That's the part you can't replicate." He paused. "And if something out there is trying to learn us by copying us, I hope they get the important part. Not the tools. Not the coffee. But the stubbornness. The hope." He walked to the door, then turned back. "Also, if anyone finds my backup thermos, I want it back." That got a few laughs. Outside, the forest was silent. The sun crept up through the trees like it had nowhere better to be. And for once, Nolan didn't feel like climbing. He just stood there, feet on solid ground, breathing in the morning. No mimics. No alarms. Just quiet. For now, that was enough.